Welcome to the first official tuning session for the Rock Panda. So this is a brand new build for me. If you haven't seen the build video, check it out. At the very end of that, I do a little testing on the tabletop with each of these tires. And tires aside, the problem I was having was this thing tipping at the steep ascents or descents. It's a very short wheelbase, and that makes it get vertical really quick. So I'm going to try to adjust that in multiple ways, and you can see I've started that already. I've disconnected these plastic 3D printed limiter straps. I left them because they were still kind of catching the edge, just to kind of play with it and see. But the problem I was having with these 3D printed ones is they are providing some spring. I still have them in the front, so they're not only limiting the travel overall of the axle, but they're holding the chassis up. So I don't want that. I want this chassis to ride low. And then the other issue is the stop at the front limiting this up travel. So I pulled out some of these trays here. I knew these were different. So this is a Jeep tray, this is a deadbolt tray. And I'd forgotten that this is so much taller than the Jeep tray. So I used a Jeep tray. So if this was designed around the deadbolt ESC tray, you'd actually have more up travel because the floor of that ESC tray would be up in there higher. So that's something to know if you're building this. But the way I mounted everything in there, I double-sided to the side, I double-sided to the top, and then the battery just friction fit slides in there. So I'm not really using the bottom surface to mount to, so I think I can pull it out totally. And to keep some bracing elements, I think I'm just going to use these chassis bar braces. So I've got a 3D printed one and an aluminum one. You can get these from Mofo RC or off the aluminum rock bouncer chassis has these aluminum ones. So that's the thought there, is just eliminate that bottom surface to get more up travel. Of course, I'm going to have to reposition this front shock because it is the limiter now. Because I had that tray there. So this stops the servo right before hitting the ESC tray. So I have to reposition that, but the goal is to maybe get this servo all the way up to this edge. So that would hopefully bring this body way down. And that would help on the climbs. And then for keeping it planted and keeping it from flopping forward on those steep ascents is maybe putting a little more weight at the wheels if needed. So I've got these weighted hexes that look like disc brakes. These are Dubro, got them off Amazon. And I got this flat face style on purpose so I could access every face of the hex, because of course they don't fit either wheel. I'm gonna have to sand them down. But they do come with a T-tool and pins, so that's nice, and they're very affordable. So that's kind of what I'm looking at to start with. And the one thing that's on the table, I've got some rear axle trio counterweights that should arrive today. If not, I'll steal them off another build temporarily. But that again, you know, I may not need 4-corner weights, but those rear axle weights will help keep it from flipping. And with the battery in there right now in the cab, I'm 63% front weight, so I'm a little too front bias. So that may help even it back out. So that's the start point. And then of course, once I get that set, I can look at these tires, test them again. They're got the really soft foams in them and they're vented. So I was thinking about maybe having to stiffen these back up. I was getting some extreme tire roll at speed, turning the wheels. Whereas these are not vented and they have the foams, and these really performed really good. But I like the look of these better, I think. So anyways, that's the start point. I'm going to dive in and start playing with this thing and see what kind of results we get, and then we'll do some testing at the end. Well, got the rear kind of worked out, I think a little bit better. Went around and around with multiple options, and really what I found is it's the rear fenders that are going to force me to use the long travel. I can put the short shocks in and they would work great, but you know, if I could flex the tire above the rear bed, and it wasn't limited by these fenders, then I could use those shorty shocks, but they do not have enough length to give me a good flex here. And you can even see when I set it here, it may not want to drop, but if I actually lift the chassis, I mean, I've got all the flex. I can set it there. It's just getting this tire tucked under this fender. But you can see I need all of this travel out of this shock to get there. So the short shocks weren't going to do it. I tried some flex blades on those. I tried flex blades on these. I tried these up in multiple positions, but ended up back here with them laid down. So you can see it drops down. And then for the limiter, I played with a few options and I landed on this one. I tried hooking them over the back, but they kept slipping off and they wanted to move those flex blades. So I basically took off each link and then hooked the rubber band under those flex blades and then put each lower link back on. So then I tried it with multiple, both of them under there is too tight. I can always take this one and hook it under those two to get a little more tension. Just playing with it if I want to tune. But I think I'm okay with it, just the tension of one of these. So that was my 1.5" rubber band. I tried it going just straight down to the axles, but those short ones, the shorter they got, it seems like the tighter they were. They didn't have too much flex or stretch, so this seemed to be the solution, is put it on the diff and make it a pivot point rather than 2 points on each side. So this thing can just pretty much swing freely, but it can't drop, all the way down. So I think the rear is set, and it's definitely down, that's for sure. So the next order of business is looking at the front. And hopefully we can make that work, because I'd like to keep matching shocks on this. So I may just have to move that shock mount hole up, drill me another hole. But I guess we'll dive into that. And then once we get the suspension set, then we can kind of look at the weight tuning. Well, that is C-tray dropped right out. 4 screws, nothing was attached to it, so you can see up in there. That's what I'm working with, a lot of space. So without it, the the links hit the transmission tray about here, I guess, is where I can feel a little resistance, a little tension, but you can get all the way, no problem. You can see what I'm talking about here. Those lower links hit the edge of the transmission upper link mount on each side, but since that tray is plastic, the links are aluminum, all it does is shift the links over on the ball joint and those O-rings. So that's the reason, I can sit here and hold it, and the chassis wants to kind of sit there, but you can easily compress it up. It's not going to do any damage. So that is extremely low. I don't know if our fenders are going to work. I was thinking about that. I could always raise these fenders up, but I kind of like how I've been able to leave that connecting leg that lips under, that kind of strengthens those, and it lips under the frame, so I'd have to cut that off if I raise them. So but it may not ride there. It may ride down a little, but it can flex and get up a lot further in here. So now I'm going to look at where to mount those crossbars, like where is my free space, get those in there, and then figure out my shock positions here. And then once I do that, I'll look at how to maybe limit it with some rubber bands. All right, got this guy sitting down low now. So I did have to drill some new shock mount points on each side. So I just made an upper. So I basically just lowered it down to the top of the servo and, you know, fully compressed the shock and found where it hit. So, you know, I could go this route for the super shorty wheelbase, but I don't think that's going to get the nose down. So now I'm kind of looking under here and trying to figure out where I want to do my limit straps. I kind of think I want to do the center point deal again. So I'm seeing if I can snake somewhere under the servo at the link mount and then come up maybe on each side to one of these screw points. So I'm going to see if I can get those on there and then see if the front fenders still work on there. Okay, front limiter strap is in, CG is lowered, that's for sure. I did the rubber bands similar to the rear with just one rubber band under basically the 4-link mount. So that goes right above the drive shaft and under the 4 links. So again, providing just a pivot there. It is allowing full droop of the axle, so I could always double that up and put both bands under there and add some more tension. But it's not really about the axle dropping as much as the chassis and the cab lifting. And of course I don't have a battery in here right now either, but it can, you know, it can fully get down on that servo now, and there's no clearance issues anywhere in the cab, which is nice. So my trio brass counterweights did not show up, so I pulled them from my donor Jeep in the back there, which I put SSD wheels on recently as alternates, and they have brass rings, so I needed to pull these off of the back to account for that anyways. So we'll put these on. If you haven't seen these are really nice. They just have 2 screws and you just kind of clamp them down. They just slide over the end of the axle housing. So it's a very nice way to add static weight that's not going to be rotating. So if you don't want to add hex weights or axle weights or wheel weights, this axle housing weight is just a great way to put it right there at the wheels. So I'm going to add that to the rear, then we'll get it on the scales, and then we'll get it on the rocks and do a little testing. Okay, first bit of bad luck here. So there's a conflict with these weights. If you tighten the wheel down, because this is a disc, it comes into contact with the outer edge of this trio weight. The second bit of bad news is this has happened to me once before on one of these metal axles. They're a little different than the stock. These won't clamp down. You can clamp them all the way down and they won't get tight enough on these ends. I've used them on trio or hot racing axles and they clamp fine. They clamp fine on stock, but they're not grabbing these mofo brass axles. So that leads me to not use those. I mean, I could put them on there. They'd be all right once the wheel's on there. I don't think they're going anywhere. But you know, it's a either or. I could take off the weights on the front, just run these on the rear, because I really just want to add some more weight to the rear. I was just going to add all around and those to the rear. So I'm going to figure out something here and get the rear wheels on, and we'll get it on the scales. All right, here we are back fully assembled. And I ended up sticking with the trio axle counterweights, obviously, and I took out the rear hex weights. And there is just a little bit of play, and just a little bit on these. Well, this one, it seems like this one has a little more. This one barely has any, but you can see they're not going anywhere. They can't slide inward and they can't fall off, so it shouldn't be an issue. So let's see what this guy weighs in at now. So on the initial build with the 3S battery, it was sitting at 373 grams with a 63 front and 37 rear ratio. So I was trying to put a little more weight in the rear to keep it from flopping forward on the descents. So it looks like we've accomplished that with those counterweights, even adding those axle weights in the front. And I can always remove those front hex weights if I want to give it a little more rear bias than it's got. So we're sitting at 5842. So that may be pretty helpful. And then obviously we're lower overall with the shock position in the front raised. So that brings the chassis down, and we've got new limiter straps in there. So I think the only thing now is to get it on the rocks and give it a little shakedown and see what kind of improvement these have made. Alright, we're going to try this rock that was so troublesome. Look at that, much improved. Let's see if we can come down without flopping. Look at that, axle weight's definitely helping. So I'm interested to see what doubling up that rubber band will do on the front. But I think we could definitely do a little better. Wow, I mean, that's vastly improved. Let me find a very steep descent over here, see if it flops. Well, it might. This is kind of off camber here, so and power out of that. Definitely tire rub in those fenders. I gotta say, I'm really liking the grip of these IROCs. So here's a steep descent. See if we can make this without tumbling forward. Nice. So it's definitely keeping the rear planted. So I think doubling up that front rubber band may make a little more improvement. I don't know, it's pretty good right now. Look at that. Wasn't doing anything like that the other day. It was just flipping right backwards. Speaking of flipping, oh, that was too off camber. One more run and then we will double up that front rubber band limiter. Alright, we'll be right back. Alright, give this another go with a little tighter front limiter strap. Look at that. Oh. Tell you what, this thing is belly dragging now. Get that axle can hold us. Look at that, the rear axle held us down and kept us from flipping. I gotta say, that was a beneficial tuning session, a much needed tuning session. So I think I may toss on the scramblers and see how they do. Man, these tires are getting all into those fenders. I think it's definitely improved from the initial build. I do miss the height, the look of it, but I do think it's performing quite a bit better. Well, we're back, and I've got basically a whole new vehicle after some further tuning. So as you can see in those couple of little running videos on the tabletop tests, there were still a few little areas to address, and one of those I doubled up the rubber band, and that really helped suck the front end down, but it wasn't allowing flex on this front end. It was holding the chassis so it would tilt the whole vehicle rather than allowing this to pivot. And the other big thing was the fenders were they were really getting into these scramblers, especially more so than those on the front. And then the rear, they were really still limiting the flex. So I readdressed, I guess, the limiting straps all around. So you can see on the rear, I went from the upper link mounts, and I used some of those plastic mofo washers there to pinch those up to the battery tray. So I drilled through there, add a little plastic washer. So that's my point there. So now I've got a true pivot, and it just gave me the right amount of tension. And then the front, I took off the one I had that was kind of going from the outside under and back up. Went to a similar kind of pivot. I still have a single rubber band. I believe it's the 1.5 inches, but it's going from one side of the upper link up and over and then down. So I get that central pivot up here again. So that's given me not full droop, but plenty of flex, and it's holding down the chassis where I want it. Gives me a good ride height, very low. So also in doing that, had to drill new shock positions. I moved these up from down here. So again, I just compressed it and figured out full compression where I needed those. And you can see on the flex here, on the rear, I'm right at the fender, right inside of it. So not hurting me there. Front, I've got even more clearance. Got plenty of full lock clearance as well. So let's look at these front fenders. That was another change. So these, I did have to cut the leg off to get them to sit flat, and I could use an existing mount hole and screw. And then the shock basically pins it. It goes through where that large hole is on the fender. So those are on there. Didn't have to re-drill anything. And then the rear ones I moved to the inside just as an experiment, and I just kind of slipped them through that wedge between the battery tray and the frame. Then of course the rear was kind of floppy, so I took that plastic brace out from under the cab and the front that I'd added, cut a little length off to shorten it, and then put it between. So now these are like super rigid. And it's also putting a little tension out on the frame. So these are in there fairly tight, and then you can see I got rubber bands to hold that back down. And then I put in some screws on each side, and they don't go through the fenders, but they kind of go up above this kind of brace to keep them from pulling up if the battery tray doesn't already. So those are on there just fine. So those are kind of the big changes, I guess. And I did take the weights, the hex weights out all around, and I just reweighed this. The percentage stayed the same. Somehow, I'm assuming these mofo rims were heavier, these rims and tire combo, because without the front hexes, keeping the rear trail weight and these rims and tires, we lost overall weight, we lost front weight, but we kept the ratio the same as what we had just had with these and the 2 hexes up front. So I think that's all the real changes here. I did put some masking tape, like 1 layer on one side of the end of the axle. That's all it took, and these fit on there tight, clamped down, so that's all good. But yeah, let's do a little running video here. Oh, one last little thing I did was I took these 2 braces I cut off and made them into a little grill. I always like to find little uses for scraps. So those came out kind of nice there. So yeah, these few little changes here have really helped it overall. So I think you'll see that in these final kind of running clips. So anyways, hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for something else. Don't know what it will be, but you know there's a build coming soon.